Okay, we're on, we're live, we're at ThinkTech here on a Friday. This is ThinkTech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell, and we have with us today Senator Will Espero from the Hawaii State Senate and retired Lieutenant General Jeff Remington, United States Air Force. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for coming down. It's a treat. It's an honor to have you both here at the same time. That's great. And thank you for being here, part of a panel. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to talk about drones over Hawaii. I entitled the show More Drones Over Hawaii because we had a program just yesterday with the Hawaii Venture Capital Association here in Pioneer Plaza about drones over Hawaii. And I want to sort of get a little grounded. That's not a good word in the Air Force, I suppose. I want to get grounded on what happened yesterday. So if you could give me your perceptions and recollections of how that program went and what was important about it, what you learned from it. Will, why don't you go first?
Well, there was a good panel of about half a dozen individuals. The university was represented, academia, General Wong with the Department of Defense. There was a retired individual and some others who have stakeholders in technology. I think one very interesting point to bring out is that drones are basically robots. Okay? And the drone that most people see on television, which is used in war, is not what we're talking about and pushing here in Hawaii. What we're looking at is an industry that is growing, and the military application has been very dominant in the media, but there are multiple other ways that UAVs, let's use the word UAV because a drone could also be a bumblebee, but an unmanned aerial vehicle. But there are many applications in civilian life. And if we can have Hawaii be chosen as one of the FAA unmanned test sites, they're choosing 6 throughout the nation. That's going to be a wonderful opportunity, a great opportunity for research and development, for companies that are interested in UAVs, and for industries that might want to do testing and research in areas such as atmospheric research. There's agricultural applications dealing with invasive species, search and rescue, so many opportunities we could use these drones.
General, you were there, and you had a Q&A that was so large that we had to actually put you up there on the stand, so to speak. And you know what? We got some very good feedback about your comments. I want you to know that.
Well, I do appreciate the opportunity to talk, because really, a remotely piloted vehicle, an unmanned area vehicle, or a robot, whatever we want to call it, a drone, actually does have men in the loop. And I think that the big policy questions we still need to answer in the United States of America is, what are we going to use the sensors for that are on those remotely piloted vehicles? And what are the policies behind those sensors? And obviously everything is very heightened today as a result of NSA actions in the past. It makes the American public feel uncomfortable. But yet we have to get past that, because it's not necessarily about the unmanned or remotely piloted vehicle itself. It's all about the sensor and what you do, what kind of information you're collecting, and what you are doing with that information. That's the big policy discussion that has to happen in our nation before people feel comfortable. Then there's the policy discussion that needs to happen with the FAA about putting a remotely piloted vehicle or unmanned area vehicle into our FAA airspace. One of the points I made yesterday was I was surprised that FedEx or DHL or UPS, any of the long-haul companies weren't in the discussion, because quite frankly, I would think it would be in their economic interest to unman a long-haul 747, which we could easily do. We have been in the unmanned vehicle business for 40 plus years in the United States of America. I used to shoot down drones in my airplane. So, you know, that back when I first entered the Air Force, they were like T-33s and then became F-4s. And
Oh, sure, they were
now
target practice.
they're for target practice, and yet, you know, they had to be unmanned if you're going to shoot at them. And in today's unmanned aircraft are capable of being on time, on altitude, will land within the second that you program it to land, and will land within inches of where you program
Well, you
it.
said that yesterday, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, I was working on the movie last night. The movie, by the way, of the program yesterday will start playing at 10:30 on Sunday night, this Sunday, the 28th, if you want to see it. And it'll play 7 times during that week. But what struck me, and you made a funny comment about you couldn't really rely on a human to be nearly as accurate as the computer.
Correct.
However, you know, here in the studio here at ThinkTech in Pioneer Plaza, we have lots of computers, and sometimes they just go bad. We've all had that experience. So you can say that it'll land within inches and exactly where you want it to, but you know, what happens if it doesn't?
And I agree that those are issues that we need to address from a policy perspective. The FAA big thing is right now, if you fly in FAA airspace, it's see and avoid. In an unmanned area vehicle, it needs to be sense and avoid. And how do you do that? We have that technology in place today, but we need to figure out what the policies and procedures will be for tomorrow to put that unmanned vehicle in our airspace and we all feel comfortable. Because it is not going to avoid unless we spend lots of money to make it avoid.
You know, you've both seen the news about the Google car.
Yes.
And you know, people really want that. But there's a sort of reservation about it. And I mean, I think this carries over into the drone world also. The reservation is the car will fail and it'll still run into somebody. and as a result, the authorities really don't, they're not really enthusiastic about putting these cars on the street.
Well, there are certainly major policy calls, as the general said, that the decision makers and the elected officials will have to make. You know, the idea of having a large airplane unmanned for some might be very frightening, but you know, maybe you could man it with an individual versus a crew of 3 or 4, and thus you do have a backup system, or at least a human being on board that airplane. And those type of policy calls will come as this issue progresses and there's more luncheons and community meetings, and once there's actual law out there where people will be able to provide testimony and input, I think you're going to see and hear from many individuals, and hopefully they will understand that the benefits to society are tremendous and enormous, and this will save resources, it will save money, it will be efficient, but it has to be something that people trust will work and will happen. You know, when you have that airplane that crashed just short of the San Francisco runway, you see what possibly human error can do. And one then thinks too, what would happen if there was a system that would have better alerted what was happening so that that wouldn't happen. So, you know, checks and balances within the technology certainly have to be in place to minimize and or not eliminate, you know, those type of tragedies.
But we are coming to that.
Yes.
I mean, Google will make it has already made the car.
Yes.
And the car already works. They just got to get through, you know, regulatory issues. And the same thing with the FedEx planes. I mean, so ultimately this will work, and it will work as well. But I certainly agree there's a need for sort of a transitional period there, where you have a real person sitting over it, watching it for at least for a while until we develop the level of confidence that will also.
And I would make a point. The senator is absolutely spot on. Man caused that crash in San Francisco, most likely.
Yes.
And had he let the airplane stay on the autopilot and land the aircraft, probably wouldn't be having this discussion today. So there are pluses and minuses that need to be addressed as to whether or not man or machine or some kind of interface is allowed to fly in our skies.
But don't you, I mean, you made a comment about how it's going to cost a lot of money
It is.
to do the, I forget the technology, but the the non-crash technology. But it's worth it, isn't it? Because
I think
we
so.
can save a lot of lives on the highways
Yes.
and also in the air.
Yeah, the possibilities, especially for an aging population, for example, that will rely on technology to help them in their golden years in their lives. I mean, I'm sure most people would love to have a car that will drive itself, or other amenities like that that'll make your life much better and improve the quality of life of our citizens.
Well, this brings me to the regulators themselves, at least on the front line, the FAA. After the program was over yesterday, we walked around the room, as we always do. We took sound from people. And one of the people we talked to was actually a retired FAA official who was there. We drew a lot of interesting people there at that program. And he was saying that he had built a drone himself because he was fascinated with drones. And because he was in the FAA, he thought he would follow the rules and apply for a permit. And that was years ago. And he could not get a permit. And was, going to give it up. And he made a comment, I don't think I put this in the film, but he made a comment to the effect that given that kind of regulation, you can't make a dollar trying to do drones. And indeed, some drone manufacturers in this state have had a lot of trouble making a dollar because they just couldn't get through that barrier. What are we going to do about the FAA?
The previous Obama administration is actually the one that tasked the FAA to figure out how to integrate unmanned area vehicles into our airspace by 2015. And as a result of, I think, America's reaction to what drones stand for today has caused us to delay that. As you know, there was a big...
The senator's point. We take it from the military point of view. We don't realize the civilian uses.
Correct. And again, I go back to it's not so much about the drone as it is about the sensor that's on that drone and what we do with that information. And to me, we should be having the debate already about putting an unmanned aerial vehicle into U.S. airspace. That debate should be going today. In conjunction with that debate should be, what do we do with the sensors that are on those area vehicles that we put in U.S. airspace? That is really and truly much more important and much more difficult than just putting an unmanned aerial vehicle into U.S. airspace. The two could run concurrently, but unfortunately, I think we're going to try to solve the harder one first before we try to put an unmanned aerial vehicle into federal airspace.
Well, we're going to have a lot of uses that we can't, it's funny, this kind of technology, you can't even imagine all the uses that will flow. Whatever we decide here at this table, whatever we speculate or imagine, it doesn't cover the ground, because in a year or two, many, many other uses will pop up.
Concur.
And the biggest issue that people do not want, that you're hearing, whether it's something that they should be fearing or not, is that they don't want the drones to spy on citizens. Okay, I'm hearing that fairly across the board from people, and I think most of us agree with that we don't want it to be lurking in the night or in the midnight with the midnight moon and just watching and waiting for people.
Very graphic image.
Exactly. Well, I like to write sometimes, but. Again, it's the benefits in science, in business. As you said, there's so many things. I even saw something on television about a month ago about a remote-controlled device that was delivering a pizza to somebody's apartment building, which was really interesting. But yeah, of course, the discussion with the FAA, though, it's an important one in terms of using the airspace, the national airspace. And with drones, it will just become more crowded. However, in Hawaii, being surrounded by an ocean, there are many possibilities in terms of testing and research and development that will make us a great place to be able to test and build these devices.
One of the points that struck me yesterday was they had a couple of drone models. I shouldn't say model. They looked like model airplanes. They were only a foot or two across, if that. and they were working. They were real drones, and they said, somebody said that with nanotechnology you could make them much smaller than that, tiny. And so you talk about the future and the moon and whatnot. I have an image of lots of little drones, all with this don't crash technology. I mean, avoidance technology, where they're all over, they're all around us, and we don't know which ones are the good ones and the bad ones, and the regulators will have to distinguish which ones are the good ones. But they do everything. They deliver pizza, and then it's a sushi company. They deliver sushi. I mean, whatever you want, it's all out there. Little ones that are programmed not to crash into anything. I mean, how far away is that? It seems to me that's pretty close, actually. If you lift the glass ceiling, so to speak, and the FAA can get comfortable with this, we're in a new world. And we're going to have to take a short break. Okay. That's Lieutenant General Jeff Remington and Senator Will Espero from the state legislature. We're talking about more drones over Hawaii. This is ThinkTech Talks. We'll be right back after this break. Okay, we're back. This is ThinkTech Talks live on a given Friday. We have Lieutenant General Jeff Remington and State Senator Will Espero talking about more drones over Hawaii and reminiscing over the program we had just yesterday, at which they were both present, called Drones Over Hawaii, and what will we do about them. You know, I also get an imagination picture of a drone that is kind of a composite of what you guys are talking about. There's the big one, the Predator, fully laden, and then there's a little one with, who knows what kind of thing it's delivering. And it seems to me that we're only exploring the technology now. At the end of the day, these drones may have multi-purposes. They may, maybe I can bring one home from Best Buy or a Shopper Image, if that still exists. And I can have one to do whatever I want. I can program it myself at home. I can program my Apple or my PC. And the same token, the big ones too, they'll be modular, and you can do all kinds of things. They probably already are modular. So I guess the question I put to you is, what do you see the development to be? Will a company? I think there is a company that does robots this way. Will there be a company, assuming the glass ceiling is off, that actually manufactures these for the mass market? Could that ever happen?
It could happen probably, but my guess is you're looking at niche markets first, specialized areas, such as research and development in atmospheric weather conditions, or search and rescue, whether it's emergency preparedness or post-disaster usage, where you could have multiple jurisdictions, cities, nations, regions buying. I think the remote airplane right now that people buy recreationally, I mean, that's sold on a mass market for recreational purposes. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you're going to see anything significant on a large scale where someone's going to make tons of money in the near future. I don't know.
Well, I will tell you that the big drones, unmanned area vehicles, remotely piloted vehicles, and I kind of tend to go to the remotely piloted vehicles because there's nothing unmanned about them. They require a lot of manpower to operate. Is You know, a big difference between the Global Hawk, which is the size of a 737, that is programmed to do what it does. And
What does it do?
it basically can fly for a day and a half, 30, 32 hours.
Around the world?
At 60,000 feet, you know, you can take off from California and you can fly all the way to the Straits of Taiwan and orbit for a while and turn around and recover. Now, you're spending a lot of time in transit trying to get there, so it's better to have it stationed forward. For in this case, we have them in Guam. The United States Air Force has them stationed in Guam. And so their station time over that Straits of Taiwan, for example, is a lot longer. But that particular vehicle is programmed by man, but basically it is flown without man telling it where to go. In other words, I type it in a computer and I say take off, and it has a link to a satellite. It takes off. It flies at 60,000 feet. It images these particular points. It turns around and it comes back and it lands exactly when I tell it to land, exactly where I tell it to land, exactly how I tell it.
Suppose it's a thunderstorm.
Well, it's probably going to fly over it, but if there's a thunderstorm, you either know that the thunderstorm's there, or you have technology in the airplane like a forward-looking camera or a weather radar, and you fly around the thunderstorm. Now, as opposed to a Predator. Predator is a very big airplane, and it has the reputation of employing ordnance. It doesn't have to employ ordnance, but that's what the reputation is.
We have a background for this program, you know, that's going to be on the green screen behind you, that is a Predator fully laden.
Okay.
It's quite a picture.
And they usually, you know, are carrying like a Maverick missile or something like that. Maybe even a small diameter bomb, which is about 250 pounds. And it flies a different way. It flies because man is flying it. It is a remotely piloted vehicle. There's a man telling it what to do.
In a bunker.
And, you know, in a bunker. In this case, most of them are up at Creech Air Force Base, just north of Las Vegas, and flying them in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, now in Afghanistan only, and telling it what to do. There's a sensor operator that's watching that sensor suite of sensors, depending on what they're looking at, whether it's IR, infrared, or electro-optical, or synthetic aperture radar, whatever. And then there's a whole lot that goes into whether or not they prosecute a target. I mean, there's rules of engagement. There's lots of stuff that goes into
Where
that.
do those rules come from?
Well, those rules come from.
We talk about regulators. Talk about, you know, government having authority over what's going on.
Right. The rules of engagement are actually set down from, I would say they come down from the National Command Authority through the combatant commander, down to the Joint Force commander, down to the air component commander that's operating these particular vehicles, as to what the rules of engagement may be. And if you remember, I remember distinctly General Petraeus giving very, very specific rules about whether or not we could or could not engage what we thought might be a target. And those rules got even more refined as General Allen got into theater. You know, I'm talking Iraq mostly, and whether or not we can go into Pakistan, for example. That is a presidential discussion. So the rules of engagement come from the National Command Authority, the President, the Secretary of Defense, down through the combatant commander, down through the air component commander, down to the actual operator that might be 22 years old operating this particular machine.
It's a blurred line. I mean, and actually it's a blurred line between the civilian side and the military side too. But the blurred line I referred to is that some missions are specifically military, in the old-fashioned conventional sense.
Correct.
It's almost as if you had a manned aircraft up there. Some missions are CIA or NSA type missions, and they require very careful choices, very careful, even quasi-judicial or judicial choices before you take someone out. And, you know, somebody has to make a decision as to whether this person is going to be killed. This is very complicated. And it's the same thing with use of drones over civilian airspace, use of civilian drones. There has to be plenty of regulation. We are only beginning. Maybe this is why the FAA is so skittish about it. It's not just that it might pose a threat to the airport and air traffic. It's that there's a million issues to cover in any regulation of the area.
Absolutely.
Yes, this will certainly have tremendous public input and feedback before you're looking at massive usage. Yes. Yes.
So now you actually introduced a resolution this past session, Will. This is a very important resolution. It was actually a central point for our discussion yesterday, although we didn't know about it until it was too late. But please tell us about the resolution.
Yes, we're looking at Senate Concurrent Resolution 137, and it was passed in the 2012 session.
2012.
Let me get- Excuse me. The FAA is looking at 6 unmanned test sites throughout the nation. And the intent behind my resolution was to partner with Alaska and have a test site in this Pacific region. You've got an ideal situation because you've got the hot subtropic climate of Hawaii, and you have the cold winters of Alaska. So you have different weather situations, and between Alaska and Hawaii, you've got the ocean that gives you endless and endless miles of test areas. The resolution was amended in the House, and looking at a partnership with Alaska and looking at promoting aerospace initiatives and space programs, working with other stakeholders at the national level. That was the final SCR 137. What came of this was that we do have an application in the FAA, and the partnership now is Alaska, Hawaii, and Oregon. So they've included the mainland, the continental U.S. as part of that. I guess you could call it a troika of states. And the FAA, we're hoping to hear from them by December. They may not name all 6. It could come out a few at a time. But we're optimistic that because of our geography, because of our location, that this would be an ideal place to be, one of the 6 unmanned test sites of the federal aviation.
So if we are selected, what follows from that? What are the benefits? What are the opportunities that come out of that?
Well, there will be meetings, there will be community input. If you think of the concept, I mean, it's a testing opportunity, and there will have to be regulations and rules set forth, of course. Private businesses, stakeholders, the military will be involved, and we'll have to set the parameters of what it will entail. The Office of Aerospace Development under Jim Crisafulli is watching this very closely. That is an agency of the Department of Business and Economic Development and Tourism. And we see opportunities for existing businesses, for new businesses, for industry. And the key, though, is to come up with a plan or formula on using the national airspace. I mean, that's what it ultimately boils down to. And with the ocean as our background, I think that most people, they shouldn't have to fear this program or the testing, because at the end of the day, we're looking to see, is this something that we want to continue with, the discussion on the usage of drones or unmanned aerial vehicles, and what are the best applications for our civilian life, as some of those areas that I mentioned earlier.
So will designation of Hawaii, not wood, I'm knocking wood, would designation of, let the record reflect, we're all knocking wood. Will the designation of Hawaii as an FAA drone area mean that we can develop an industry here or expand whatever industry we have? I mean, is that part of it?
Oh, certainly, certainly. We've always tried to look at diversifying Hawaii's economy. And this is clearly the area of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And it ties into what we're doing today with our robotics programs in our public schools. 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have these robotic programs in the schools. Now we've got them in our elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools.
It's a perfect transition, actually.
Exactly, and I'm trying to do more to get more robotics into the university. I'd like to see one day some type of institute of robotics created in the state. That can be a national leader in technology, in space exploration. There's so many opportunities here in aerospace, and this is certainly one of them that could provide high-paying jobs for our residents that are not in tourism or construction or whatever the case may be.
From your lips to God's ears, that we should have a big, robust industry, a tech industry, and focus on the front end, the cutting edge like that. When we come back from the next break, I'd like to ask you fellas about who exactly is going to manufacture these things, and whether there's any barriers, or whether there will be any barriers. Certainly on the military side, the military would be concerned that somebody else will do at least as good or better a job. And then you have a war of drones, in a way, a technological war. And the same thing here. I mean, if all the drones come from China, are we really ahead? Let's take a short break and come back and dwell on that. This is ThinkTech Talks. We're here with Lieutenant General Jeff Remington and State Senator Will Espero. We're talking about more drones over Hawaii, more drones even than yesterday when we had drones over Hawaii at the Plaza Club. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. We're live. We're ThinkTech Talks here on a given Friday. We have Lieutenant General Jeff Remington with us, United States Air Force retired. And we have Senator Will Espero, who is not only a member of the state Senate, but is a candidate for the United States Congress, which makes him interested on both levels of the subject.
Very much so. There's certainly a direct connection between what's decisions are being made at the federal level and how those are impacting all of the states, but especially Hawaii.
Yeah, you're in a great position to sort of deal with both ends of the issue.
Yes.
So before the break, I mentioned that I think we ought to talk about the competition. Maybe that's a loose use of the word, but on the military side, it's like making jet planes in general. You make one, the other guy tries to make one as good as yours so he can shoot you down. You try to make one that can't be shot down, and you make one that can shoot his one that's trying to shoot you, and it's a competition of sorts over a period of time, a leapfrog. So isn't the same thing for the military now? Isn't the exact same thing going to happen here? It's not hard. I mean, for example, we thought we were the only ones who commanded hacking. Well, that's not true. They can do plenty of hacking elsewhere. They can hack us pretty much like we can hack them. So the same thing with drones, isn't it?
I agree 100%. I mean, China is building some kind of unmanned aerial vehicle. What their intent behind that is, we don't know yet. Israel is looking at developing unmanned aerial vehicles. What their intent is, we don't know yet. We have many policies within our U.S. government about what kind of vehicles we can or cannot sell to our allies and to our friends.
And parts.
And parts. But take, for example, one that does intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance from high altitude. In this particular case, it's called Global Hawk. Now, I need to, truth in lending, I am a Northrop Grumman employee, and so I can't advocate for whether or not Hawaii is part of the 6 test sites or not, or whether or not, we're selling Global Hawk to anybody. But
We don't hold that against you at all, General.
what I can say is I think it's the right thing. I think we do need the 6 test sites. I think that that is a step in the right direction. But back to the question you asked. I don't think in this in this near future, 10, 15 years from now, that we're really going to get into the debate of whether or not we build unmanned aerial fighters. Different discussion. Could we? Yes, we do today. We make them drones and we shoot them down.
I hadn't thought of that. Fighters.
But
Old-fashioned fighters.
There was a debate, and I think we may get to that point sometime in the future. Perhaps. But it depends on what the threat is and what you want to do and whether or not you're relying. And when I say it's unmanned, it might be remotely piloted.
And so skill counts.
Or it could be totally autonomous. I don't believe that we're anywhere near, 1, the technology, 2, the policy, the willingness of the United States public to accept an unmanned, autonomous. It thinks for itself. It employs ordnance on its own. I said that yesterday. I don't see that happening.
I think I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger in a movie where there was and of course it turned against him, didn't it?
Correct. That's decades away, maybe centuries away. But other nations are doing this. Now, it is in the U.S.
He might
interest.
do it sooner than we do it.
Well, they're already doing it.
They're not
already doing it.
impeded by the same ethics, maybe.
Correct. That in itself is an issue. But what we really need to think about from a U.S. perspective is what technologies can and should we share with our allies, with our friends, with folks that don't necessarily see democracy and human rights the same way we do. Because from the Pacific Command perspective, he's got half the ocean, half the Earth's surface to look at. And so we in America, we can't afford all that. So let's get our allies, one of them is Korea, one of them is Japan, let's get our friends, maybe Singapore, which has, all 3 of those have policy implications that we need to discuss in Congress, on the Hill, and whether or not are we gonna do a waiver for missile technology control regime for Singapore. That's a huge political question, and it has implications in the region, has implications locally for Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia. But it's a whole lot easier to have those people, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, monitor the Straits of Malacca rather than the United States Navy steam down there, or the United States Air Force go over there with a drone, or whatever. I mean, have our friends and allies that it's in their interest to do that. Okay? And sometime in the future, maybe even China's part of it. Because anti-piracy for China is just as important as anti-piracy for the United States of America.
Sure, they're getting the idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't forget, we're doing our next program in August 22nd, and it's called, I don't think you were there at this moment, but it's called Don't Be Afraid to Send Your Kid or CEO to China. Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness in the People's Republic. Anyway, so on the civilian side, I would ask you the same question. We can make them here, but they can make them there.
Yes.
And there's a competition, no?
Well, certainly. And nobody expects drones to be mass-produced like radios or cars. This is certainly a niche market in multiple industries. The military one obviously is probably the largest driver today for private enterprise. But what we want to do here in Hawaii is be the leader in the civilian application and the civilian research and development. These military decisions are being made, with the president, with the Pentagon at levels above our pay grade. However, if we can be the leader in search and rescue, in, again, atmospheric weather research, using drones for agriculture, fighting invasive species, just so many opportunities, and that's where we want to put Hawaii on the map and try to be a leader and be a part of this new industry that is in its infancy. And to one of your questions, yes, this is just technology, and every year, every 2 years, it will change, it will improve, it will get better. So there's going to have to be a continuity of research and development and just having a better product, and hopefully, if we can't at least manufacture them here, at least we can be the innovation, the creativity. We can use our intelligence, our university-educated engineers and others to be the ones who are designing them and developing them into the best product that a drone can be developed into.
Correct.
Yes.
And let me make a point that if you think back to Katrina was a while ago, and we couldn't get unmanned aerial vehicles into the airspace over that disaster area. But think of what we could have done had we been able to. Now fast forward to just last year, fires in California. And we were able to put a Global Hawk over the top of the fires in California at a very high altitude and help firefighters feed that information directly to the first responders and say, you got a problem on the other side of that ridge, you got people stranded there, or the fire's burning there, or whatever, and help them fight that fire. Think about what we did with the tsunami in Japan. We flew Global Hawk, and we were able to tell what the reactors were doing, and actually able to go down there and sample, how contaminated is the air. So all of those are what I call humanitarian assistance, disaster relief applications for any unmanned aerial vehicle, whether it be military, civilian, whatever.
It goes to my point about modularity, and I agree with you, Will, that what you have is very creative engineers in this country, in Hawaii, who can configure the equipment in a way that applies to a certain need, a certain use. Right. So we'll be able, I'm very confident, we'll be able to figure out how to address many, many uses. But I also think that the components, we get will be made, maybe designed elsewhere. The sensors, for example, the cutting edge of the technology. It doesn't have to be manufactured, even designed here, but the configuration will probably be made here. I'm reminded of solar panels. A few years ago, the Chinese knew nothing about solar panels. They made their minds up. They're going to have solar panels, and they're going to be the best and all that in the world. And in the space of, maybe 3 years, it wasn't very long, they dominated the market to the point where we had to do tariffs on that. And when you're in Congress, you're going to be faced, I think you're going to be faced with tariffs on this kind of technology in the same way as solar panels.
One of our panelists yesterday made mention of it, and we didn't discuss it very much, but is what do you do with all that information? And how do you process that information and disseminate that information such that it is useful to man, whether it is agriculture, fighting a forest fire, or military intelligence? What do you do with it? And how do you process it?
Well, that of course, that goes to the question that you guys both talked about earlier, and that is surveillance and data gathering, which is, as Avi Soifer said yesterday, much in the news, I think he said.
Right.
And, the state is certainly going to have an issue about that. The police are going to want to use those things. It's very helpful. Highway situations, crime situations, you name it. Ideally, I hate to say this, but the government would like to watch everything in its jurisdiction. What better way to do that than to have a continuous flight of drones?
Yeah.
Well, next session I'll be introducing legislation that will look at creating a working group possibly many of the people that were in that lunchroom yesterday. And to begin, how is Hawaii going to approach this? What's it going to take to make it happen if it is going to happen? And obviously, there's going to be multiple stakeholders with multiple opinions, and that's what we need to do. It can't be, it was stated yesterday, this can't be driven by government. The private sector has to get actively engaged, the designers, the manufacturers, and then the Joe regular citizen needs to give their 2 cents on how these will be utilized. But there are certainly so many positive benefits that I believe this is something that we must continue and we must move forward on.
Well, that seems to suggest that, like clean energy, drones are a transformation of our way of life, of our society, not only in the military sense or even the police sense, but everything.
Well, and if you use or equate drones with robots and robotics,
Sure.
Clearly yes, because we haven't even discussed underwater drones or robotics.
Correct.
We haven't talked about robotics in the medical field, in dealing with the elderly, nano robotics. There's just so many ways that robotics will benefit mankind and will improve our qualities of life.
It's great to be alive, isn't it? To have these prospects in front of us.
Yes.
On the military side, it seems to me that drones are a whole new chapter in warfighting. That term always troubled me, but I'll use it anyway. It's a whole new chapter in warfighting. It's a whole new chapter for the defense industry, for the dual-use industry. I mentioned yesterday that, as far as I know, right now the country is spending $6 billion a year on designing and building drones. And maybe that's a short figure, who knows what a total is. But by the way, I think it's around the same for surveillance in general, data surveillance, but we're not talking about that today. I guess the question I would put to you is, as we go forward, the industry, both on the civilian side and on the military side, how is this going to affect these sectors of the economy, these design manufacturer sectors, the military sector of the economy? What effects will we see emerging out of it?
I think you will see an industry that is agile enough to go away. We used to build F-4s by the thousands. And now we're going to build F-35s. We're going to build 1,763 for the United States Air Force. That's it. And that's today, before they have the budget debates and everything else. And so I think 1,763 is a very optimistic number. But in the same time, we have built 65, or on track to build 65 caps. Each cap is about 4 airplanes. And in fact, the United States Air Force today is buying more unmanned aerial vehicles than it is buying manned vehicles.
The transformation?
The transformation is there. But the real benefit of an unmanned aerial vehicle, in my opinion, is not the platform. It's what you can do with that platform in the form of sensors. Because the United States Air Force, the United States military writ large, has grown extremely dependent on space. What happens when space is gone? What happens when our enemy decides they're going to vote and take away space from us? How do we fight through that? I maintain you can do a lot of that airborne with an unmanned aerial vehicle. And all you got to do is put the right payload on it. The right payload is a sensor. It is a communication node, and it allows us to pass this data back and forth that we would otherwise, the satellite went away for whatever reason, whether it was jammed or kinetically defeated or electromagnetic pulse, whatever. It's gone. Maybe it's just hacked by cyber. So what do we do? Well, I believe, in fact, I know that we can build these large, high-capacity backbones that are airborne, that can move wherever we need to go. I can set it up anywhere in the world. Anywhere.
Changes.
And now imagine what I can do with that in humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. All the cell phones were gone at Katrina. Had we been able to put an unmanned aerial vehicle with this bridge in there, we could have talked to anybody.
Sure.
Well,
sure.
Yeah.
An emergency cell phone.
Yeah, exactly.
So, could you ever have imagined this back in the day when you were in the Air Force Academy or West Point, wherever you went to school? I'm going to leave that question till after the break. It's like we individually, we are going to be, all of us, profoundly affected. And that's what I want to talk about right after the break. This is ThinkTech Talks. We're here with Lieutenant General Jeff Remington, U.S. Air Force, retired, and Senator and Congressional candidate Will Espero. We're talking about drones, more drones over Hawaii. We'll be right back after this break. We're back. We're live. We're ThinkTech Talks. We're streaming on Ustream and on Spreaker.com. You can find the links to all our streams on ThinkTechHawaii.com. And this show will be posted on Olelo and also on YouTube very shortly. So I wanted to follow a point you made in the break, Senator Espero, and that is it affects us in our lives. Like Dick Tracy has come true. Like whatever, and this is my point yesterday when I made my opening remarks was in 1920, Karel Kopek, he was a Yugoslavian, Romanian author, and maybe a scientist. He wrote a book. It was a play. It was called Russman's Universal Robots. And it was the first piece of fiction, or maybe semi-fiction, that was addressed to the imagination of our robots. And after that, there were lots of books. And what happened is imagination became fact. All of these things we're talking about started with imagination, and then technology made it real. What a great time to be alive.
Yes.
We've been doing this for a long time, and we're going to continue to do it. So, I mean, aside from feeling great about being alive, how do you see this unfolding? I mean, in the Dick Tracy sense.
Well, if I may look at it from a macro point of view, we're talking about aviation, we're talking about aerospace. And I've been a champion in the state legislature on creating and building our aerospace industry here. A niche market, but certainly a niche market with lots of promise. For example, in maybe 3 to 5 years, we're going to be looking at space tourism, where individuals will be able to go into lower suborbit at maybe $100,000 to $200,000 round trip, but a very niche market, but will enhance tourism. The University of Hawaii has a small satellite launch program where they're working with the DoD out at Barking Sands in Kauai. From that program, we could possibly develop a small satellite launching program that could bring anywhere from $10 to $15 million per launch, because someone's going to have to launch these small satellites for communications, for weather, for whatever the case may be. And this discussion with drones is part of that discussion on building and developing an aerospace industry. We're looking at, on the Big Island, creating a research park based on going back to the moon and going to Mars and beyond. Hank Rogers is very involved with that. With Blue Planet Foundation. Governor George Ariyoshi is the current Pisces board chairman. And again, there's lots of promise. There are outside companies who want to come to Hawaii and work with us. And it's exciting in terms of the aerospace industry as a whole.
It really is. We're on the cusp
Yes.
of something. And you're there. And
Yes.
as and when you go to Congress, you'll be there.
Well,
You can help us at both ends of it.
exactly. What I've started at the state, I can continue at the federal level.
General, what I almost wish there was a program where a retired guy like your own self could go back in. Don't you wish there was a program like that too? And sort of take up where you left off and shepherd these things through, don't you think?
I had a great 35-year career.
Okay.
And it's a young man's game when you get in that airplane. So I am happy to be on the other side, but still associated because industry is really and truly the driver. Some of these ideas are industry ideas that we bring back to the military because we come from the military, understand what the requirement is. But I will also tell you that the young people today in our military are as bright as they've ever been, and they come up with ideas that all of a sudden you go, well, why didn't you think of that?
So it's what we were talking about during the break. It's a certain generation where they're comfortable with computers. They think out of the box.
Exactly.
They're just sort of natively smart on these things.
I always maintain that my girls are much more qualified than me because they can talk on the phone, they can text in their pocket, they can watch a television program, and all of these things at once while they're trying to do their homework. That is a perfect RPA pilot. Multitask.
While they're doing their homework.
I am one task at a time type of person. So it's all in what you're comfortable with. It's all in how you think. They are three-dimensional, four-dimensional thinkers now. They are not two-dimensional thinkers. And when you are thinking in 3 dimensions plus time, the opportunities are endless. And I will guarantee you that when I was flying my F-16 back in the 1980s, I was not thinking of these capabilities that we have today. And that was only 30 years ago.
See how times have changed.
Yes.
You have closing words, Senator Espero?
Well, I want to thank you for this opportunity. In terms of, again, drones, this is a discussion that will certainly continue, and there'll be ample opportunity for many of your listeners and residents to submit their feelings about this because their input is going to drive where we go on this issue.
We'll be happy to discuss and broadcast information about the group you're organizing and to help you in any way and be part of it if you like.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you, Senator Espero. Thank you, General.
Thank
Great
you.
to have you guys here.
Thank
This
you.
is ThinkTech Talks. We've had a great time with Lieutenant General Jeff Remington and Senator Will Espero talking about drones, droning on, as it were, about drones. ThinkTech Talks. We'll be talking to you later with ThinkTech Friday. Thanks a lot.